Welcome everyone to week 14 of our human resources journey. This week and next week are going to be some more. I would call it current events wrap up. We're going to talk a little bit about trends happening in the workforce nowadays, and then next week we're going to talk about kind of close some of the circles of conversation that we've been having. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on this presentation here. Wonderful. So, really, today, what I want to talk about is the pandemic. I think that that's really what we need to consider, and the impact that that's having on telework. One of the things that HR professionals understand, but a lot of people are still not putting together, is that the changing state landscape of remote work, hybrid work, telework policies are fundamentally rearranging our economy from the way that we commute to the way that we spend money. These are all considerations, and if we're not thinking about them strategically as an organization, we're never going to be able to accomplish any of our long-term personnel goals. So when the pandemic first hit, there was a massive spike of job loss from the entities that you would imagine would have the greatest drop off. Leisure and hospitality absolutely made sense. People aren't spending as much leisure money. Professional and business services, those consulting type jobs, the CPAs and the fiduciaries, those are generally not super essential. Manufacturing, information, education and health services and government is a little surprising, just based off of the necessity of it. But the economic changes, there's not much of a profit margin to eat into, to be able to retain employees, and certain government sectors definitely made an intentional choice about not retaining employees. And so that was a trend that you saw throughout it. Nonprofits were hit incredibly hard by the pandemic. You're seeing net losses of up to 35%. This is the nonprofit area that my sister-in-law works in arts and entertainment, and her theater company was impacted by this sort of effect as well. But you're seeing massive job losses across the board, and when something like this happens, whether you're looking at something like the Great Depression or you're looking at potentially the Great Recession in 2007, you're seeing some fundamental changes happening to where we how we're working, and really the impact that it's had the pandemic has had most on us is where we are actually working. So you can see from that spike in telework that happened right at the beginning of the pandemic, right around March, April 2020. There were a lot of sectors that emergency transition to work from home policies, and that number has slowly leveled off, where you're looking total work from home is right around that 40 to 45% rate. And then you're looking at some other variations of from home, whether it's a hybrid policy or a full telework policy, coming in around that 20 to 25% mark. So you're seeing about half the economy work at least part from home while you're out. White collar employees, that's obviously more common because their jobs are generally more looking at a computer type jobs that can be done at home. And demographics, this is I I included this to discuss, the differential impacts, but also to highlight that when we talk about workforce, we often, lump these groups together, but it's important to realize that the experience of work, it can differ dramatically depending on who you are and your socioeconomic background, right? So you're looking at um, women having more of an ability to work from home than men. You're looking at Asian Americans having a dramatically higher ability to work from home than your white, Hispanic, Latino, and African American groups. And a lot of this has to do by the socioeconomic sorting that our workforce has done over the years, where women and people of color are more likely to work in those sectors most impacted by it, leisure and hospitality, professional services, and so where that those blue collar jobs that have less remote work accessibility are generally worked by your white Americans and your Hispanic and Latinx communities. Oh, one too many. The other effect we talked about this earlier this semester as well is the massive impact that the pandemic had on women. Because when I talk about the pandemic restructuring our economy altogether, this is one of the effects that it had is that it revealed this undergirding that even though a lot of women had entered the workforce, they were still considered in their household as the primary childcare. And so when schools closed down, when daycares closed down, it wasn't necessarily men all the time leaving their work or working from home, but it was women. And one of the consequences of that is that if their work couldn't transition them to part time or full time remote work, they were just leaving the workforce. And our workforce participation rate is down dramatically from the beginning of the pandemic, and you're seeing that trend primarily affect women in a lot of ways. Um, when we talk about telework, remote work, there's a bunch of different ways we can talk about it, but really, what we're talking about is flexible time, flex time. So that's where you can work your 40 hours a week in different ways and different places instead of your traditional 8 to 5 or whatever you may be working. You're also talking about your flex place. This was terminology that is was traditionally used by HR researchers and HR professionals prior to the pandemic. Now we're talking a lot more about remote work, but that flex place is really important because it allows you to work almost entirely at home, or you're spending your time split between multiple locations. And then job sharing is a crucial impact for a bunch of different reasons. Partly because of our reliance on independent contractor work, and partly because of the impact that inflation and overall economic trends have had on spending habits across the country. So when we're talking about flexible arrangements, a lot of this data is pre COVID, because it's important to understand that this remote work boom honestly wasn't surprising to people who were actually paying attention to workforce trends. Even back in 2017, um, 47 to 63% of millennials were talking about flexibility of their work being one of the highest ranking benefits of jobs that they're looking for, even higher than student loans and tuition reimbursement. The other thing you have to remember is that boomers pre-pandemic were also talking about flexible work from home opportunities at a rate of nearly 31 to 47% as well. And so these trends were coming around, and while it hit us a lot quicker than we thought it would, it wasn't necessarily a surprise for watchers of the workforce. Um, when you talk about the benefits of flexible arrangements, it really hits at kind of the core thesis of this course, which is human resources needs to adjust to view their personnel assets as people, not just as employees. Because when you start unpacking the reason why flex work is important, you start revealing some major cracks in our system. So, what are the main concerns that people have that flexible work helps solve? Well, the first is work life balance, right? Having the ability to not leave their family entirely to go to their job. Time savings. There's this trend going around in Colorado called supercommuters. Supercommuters are people who drive more than 1 hour per day to get to their workplace. That trend was increasing dramatically, and with the growing sprawl of the Denver metro area, that sort of traffic pattern, or that sort of traffic data around people commuting a long time is just increasing more and more. Cost savings is also a really important component of this, whether that's cost savings from the commute or cost savings from daycare are major concerns. And then avoiding office distractions. This is something that if you or someone you know works in a hybrid work capacity, you'll hear the common theme that it's you're more productive at home than you are at work because no one buds you at home. That is something that is definitely a reality. But when you start looking at these things, what it starts to reveal is that we had in our heads as a collective society built our lives around work, around these things that we thought were permanent factors of our work, whether it was the commute built into it or the 8 to 5 everyday grind sort of work. Um, and as soon as the pandemic hit, many people shifted to remote work. Productivity didn't go down, and it revealed that, oh no, our system is more flexible and more agile than we appreciated before this. This was again coming for a long time. 2010, when Congress actually passed stuff, we looked at the Telework Enhancement Act that established a federal telework policy for the first time, where people could apply for and create telework strategies with their agencies and help start leveraging technology to build people out the infrastructure they need to be able to work from home. President Obama then in 2014 spoke about enhancing workforce flexibilities and the work life program through a presidential memorandum. This is includes things such as the administration's support of the right to request work flexibility, expanding access to work flexibility, expanding availability, and encouraging the use of work-life balance programs. This is one of the things you're starting to see as you know, from a policy perspective, coming out of states in particular, is increase in requirements on businesses to allow for reasonable scheduling. One of the bills that's being debated in the Colorado General Assembly right now is the surprise scheduling bill, I believe is what it's colloquially called, where it's looking at workplaces that have inconsistent or variable schedules, requiring those schedules to be posted in advance so that people are not blindsided. If you've ever worked in the food and hospitality industry, you know that the shifts change dramatically, even up until the night before or the day of. And so this is the policy direction that you're starting to see a continued expansion of workers' rights as it comes to their interactions with HR. Um, and then obviously when the pandemic first hit, you're seeing remote work spiking. Um, and this tension between this political tension happening between most of the workforce moving to this remote work and finding value and permanency in it. The Trump administration at the time was talking about how they're flipping back and forth between working full time, telework, what's better, what's worse, and that sort of inconsistency had a major impact on the employment and the incumbency at the federal level. Colorado, even prior to COVID, had created the Colorado Flex policy, which it was established in a very Colorado way, where it was framed around energy and environmental considerations. So being able to decrease the number of single occupant commuters driving to work every day, reducing traffic congestion, which we have seen some effect from the pandemic still be retained to this point. You're talking about how flexible work allows you to recruit a more diverse workforce, because you're allowing for more people to access your workplace, not just the people geographically nearby. It's also aiming at reducing turnover, reducing absenteeism from work. So if people have the ability to work from home, they're less likely to not show up for work at all. And then enhancing services through efficiency, productivity, and customer service. That when people are supported, they're going to work harder. That's the sort of thing that you're seeing. And back to the traffic congestion, one of the trends that you've noticed because of the pandemic was that less people were commuting, so traffic was less congested, and um, that effect has largely gone away. But there's 2 days of the week that you still see significantly reduced traffic congestion as to before the pandemic, and that's Mondays and Fridays. Because if people are going to have flex policies, a lot of them will take advantage of it on Mondays and Fridays, and then work from the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Um, the other thing that the pandemic revealed is the amount of people that have gig economy jobs. When we talk about the gig economy, I'm going to talk about it from a couple of different perspectives. First, I want you to understand that by 2020, before the pandemic, 43% of the workforce worked in the gig economy, meaning that they either worked as an independent contractor in doing Uber Eats or uh, what's the shopping one?
Instacart.
Instacart, thank you. Instacart. See, these Ubers, that sort of thing, it was becoming more common, and then the pandemic hit, and that was suddenly the only gig that a lot of people had, and so this trend that we were seeing over the years um, has been increasing dramatically. The other perspective I want you to see it is from the organizational perspective. Looking at the trends in hiring overall, you're seeing these highly specific technical jobs being incredibly difficult to fill. You're talking about police, which is its own thing. I'm not even going to get into it. Engineers is a huge thing. Hiring is difficult. Maintenance work and labor, technical skills, those other skilled trades, dispatch, IT network administration, IT other and IT support are also on here. Healthcare, building and grounds cleaning. You're seeing these jobs that a lot of them don't have the ability to work from home. Some of them do, and the effect that flexible work has had on the hiring of these individuals has revealed that governments in particular are incredibly reliant on independent contractors and gig workers to cover a lot of the work that they do, whether it's hiring private security to compensate for lack of hiring and policing, or outsourcing custodial and facilities maintenance to third parties, and that was something that was becoming a trend. But what we're starting to realize now, because there's such a reliance on that, is that even those contractors are struggling to fill positions, and so it's not as much of an easy fit. And so what you have to imagine is that not only are the people who are primarily working for you as traditional employees working second jobs in a lot of situations, but you're also interacting as an organization with a tremendous amount of independent contractors, which has its own liability and work culture concerns that you run into. Um, by the time you're in September 2022, 5% of all Americans had two or more jobs, and that was just what was reported. A lot of studies have suggested that people who work for Uber Eats or Instacart or any of these other apps, I can't remember, are not reporting those as jobs, because it's just part of what they do outside of their traditional work. And so um, when you're talking about the reliance and the participation in the gig economy, you also need to appreciate that there is a difference between contingent gig workers and independent gig workers. Independent gig workers are your traditional independent contractors who are coming in to perform a service, whether it's custodial services or maybe legal review, that sort of stuff. Contingent gig workers are those time and place workers, right? Where, for example, Commerce City hosts a parade every year, and we have to hire additional workers to help staff the parade and make sure that the parade route is full, because we don't have enough employees in our police department to cover those positions, and so we have to bring in independent gig workers, but they're only working contingent on events actually happening. This was the origin of gig work. You're showing up for a gig to work. And so that had an adverse impact. Those were adversely impacted as compared to independent gig workers by the COVID pandemic because these events were getting canceled and you're not seeing as much of that. And so there's a lot of different considerations, and this is a really interesting graph that Gallup put together according to one of their studies, talking about the reason why people work independent or contingent jobs, and it changes dramatically depending on what you're looking for. Um, Also, desire to work from home is another thing that will get brought up often. The When we're talking about people working from home, pre to post pandemic, um, the number of people working primarily from home has tripled. I think that we have to really understand and appreciate what a massive impact that will have on the way that we work. The massive impact it's going to have on all of the different things that we've talked about during this course, whether it's job analyses and job descriptions, to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to what do we do? How do we build telework into our collective bargaining agreements, right? Um, the desire to work from home is something that is happening across the spectrum, and I actually changed a lot of the numbers and data I was using in this purely because I don't want to just focus on the public or nonprofit sectors. It's important to realize that 56% of employees, regardless of the sector, want the ability to at least do some of their work from home. 62% of active employees said they could work remote before the pandemic, and what we realized is that number is actually a lot higher because of the continuity of a lot of our workforce through the pandemic because of that. And then looking during the pandemic, you're actually seeing desk vacancy rates, or post pandemic, you're seeing desk vacancy rates of above 50 to 60% consistently. And this is just a trend in the workforce that you can have a couple of different reactions to, right? And so when you start talking about the ability to work from home, you're saying that not only is this something that is a reality that you have to adjust to because of public health concerns and the like, you're also talking about this is what people are demanding on the job market as well. Right now, of job holders that were surveyed, 58% said they can work remotely at least part of the time. So what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of people and a lot of I I'm going to overgeneralize, but a lot of older managers, a lot of older individuals in management positions in the workforce, you're starting to see them calling for a greater return to the office, right? And while it's really easy to think about your organization in particular and think about whether or not something can work, it's important to remember that if 58% of all workers say they can work remotely at least part of the time, that means that a majority of the economy is allowing for remote work, and the economy is not shut down, and the economy is not crumbled under that. And so by changing your policies, you're essentially changing and affecting the way that you hire and retain employees, because you have to then compensate for those employees that are required to work full time in the office now. How are you going to make up that for the additional all those benefits that we talked about at the beginning, right? How are you going to make up for that work life balance, that commute time? And is that even possible to do? That those are the sort of strategic considerations we need to have as we go about it. But work from home is not just something that's being driven by the labor market. It's actually cheaper because employers can save an average of $11,000 per half-time telecommuter per year. It is cheaper by nearly $22,000 to have a full-time teleworker than it is to have a full-time in the office person, because of increased productivity, lower real estate costs, and reduced absenteeism and turnover. That middle part is really, really important because a lot of organizations just started not holding leases for their office spaces anymore, whether they could operate out of someone's house or operate purely remote off of people's personal computers. A lot of people were able to eliminate a lot of those overhead costs that were really affecting their bottom line. And this is something that, regardless of how you personally feel about telework, this is something that a lot of people are looking at and saying this is an incredible cost savings. And for cash strapped public and nonprofit organizations, that's something that's very, very positive to look for. Now, I don't want to be too Pollyannish. I do think that remote work has been a very important development in our economy. But from an HR perspective, it's important to understand that because of the pandemic, we now have a bunch of new problems that we need to be thinking about constantly in order to truly appreciate the challenges of our new workforce. We still are struggling with rules and regulations changing. We're still struggling with hiring. You're still struggling with training, compensation, retention, all these sort of things. But now you're seeing a rise in conversations about mental health and well-being programs, the management of remote work, which we'll talk about here in a second, the lack of agility for an organization to be able to respond to things, or the lack of autonomy for employees, employee communication, uncertainty about future work schedules. I know that that's something that impacts quite a few public sector employees that I know. And then employee engagement. How are you keeping your employees engaged with the organization because of the new telework policies? Um, so when you start considering what we need to do to respond to telework in our new environment, we're going to use our SHRM management system to think about this from a strategic perspective. How can you build telework smartly and successfully into your workplace, not just now, but going way into the future as well? And so, the first thing is developing and adopting a policy agreement for employees, helping lay the ground rules for what your telework policy looks like, identifying offsite job functions and tasks, as well as when and where they'll be performed. Right? What are the parts of your job that can be fully remote? What are the parts of your job that you need to do from the office? You also need to start assessing mechanisms for connectivity, such as software. This is where there's we didn't get into it a ton in this class, but there's a huge intersection in a lot of public sector organizations between HR and IT because of the reliance on software, on backend network systems to support personnel systems. And so understanding, do we have the technology to support telework as well? How are we dealing with reliable internet connectivity and reliable power supplies? Some organizations have moved to providing stipends for internet costs because of your working from home. Reliable power supply is really important for jobs that have to be on call, have to access something. So if power goes out in someone's home, what effect does that have? And then also thinking about now, what effect does it have if the power goes out at your main office building? Because now it's not going to have as much of an impact on your employees, right? You also need to start looking at legal requirements, obligations. What are your liability issues? What are the job functions, equipment, tools needed to support your employees? Legal requirements, obligations, liability. We're talking a lot about how do you treat if someone gets hurt while on a break teleworking from home, right? How does that treated? And the current jurisprudence right now has left it at teleworking employers who offer telework are not liable for injuries that occur while teleworking. But that may change in the future. I'm not a legal prognosticator, but also making sure that, are we requiring people to bring their own equipment? Do they need to use office equipment? How do they get it there? And then also just talking about their living environment, their ability to carry out tasks. One of the things that we don't fully appreciate is that while people may say, yes, I want to work from home, they may not have a supportive work from home environment. Currently, they may think they do, but if you once you start working from home and you start having your pets, your kids, your spouses, your neighbors, your traffic outside, everything start to distract you, you have to give your employees the support that they need to figure out what their ideal work from home environment looks like. Um, I, this is also where you need to start building in some culture changes as well, talking about how is your organization going to react if a child walks into the room during a meeting, for example? How is this having an adverse mental health effect on employees who have to work from the office, seeing other employees not working from the office? Are we properly supporting employees who are fully teleworking in their mental health and long-term health needs? Um, and then, talking about how things will be measured. This is really where I'm going to jump on my soapbox really quick and talk about my biggest gripe with people who complain about telework. Telework in practice is something that I very much enjoy. My organization has a very flexible telework policy, and I hear nothing but positive things from the people who are able to take advantage of it. And one of the biggest concerns we have is the amount of time that people are spending working. Now, I'm going to break the lid on something, on a belief that a lot of people had, that because people were coming into the office 40 hours a week, that they were getting 40 hours of work done. That is just not supported by any sort of data or evidence. In fact, people were losing upwards of 25% productivity prior to the pandemic because of work office distractions. And so when people move to remote, all these people who had been distracted in the workplace were all of a sudden able to work at their maximum productivity. And one of the things that occurs with that is that a lot of people, especially if you're not working on in a specific shift or time frame, a lot of people are not working 40 hours a week. Sometimes they're working 80, don't get me wrong, and then sometimes they're working 20. And you have to appreciate that people are going to perform differently in different environments. And so you need to have a really hard conversation with your organization, with your department directors, with your managers about how you're going to measure productivity and work outputs in a work from home environment. Is it something incredibly draconian that you do where it's tracking the amount of times your employees' computers are active, which is no joke, something that organizations are doing during telework? Or are you looking at something a lot more lax where you're like, you take the as long as work is still being done and you're meeting these specific performance measures, then I don't care. And it's important to understand the impacts of how you're measuring performance and productivity. I'm going to throw something out there and say that it is my opinion that if you feel like you cannot trust your employees to work from home, it means that you are not a good manager, because you should be in at all points giving your employees the ability to succeed regardless of their work conditions. And if you don't have the ability to support your employees like that, it's your responsibility to go to HR, to go to your organization and say, I need those resources. The burden of supporting employees needs to fall back on organizations. We talked way back at the beginning of this class about this shift from the human resources model to this more people services model, this people focused model. This is exactly what I'm talking about. How do you do the things you need to do from an HR perspective, such as assigning work, assessing productivity, achieving strategic outcomes? But how do you do that in a way that actually empowers your employees to get that sort of work done? And how are you supporting your employees in getting there? And then looking for opportunities to pilot programs, and obtaining buy-in from other individuals during the program is really important. That obtaining buy-in from elected officials and the public is really important in a lot of local governments, because that's the world I live in. Um, Purely because a lot of elected officials are what? They're older. They're often not as attuned to the world's changing workplace structures. And so I know in my organization there are certain city council members that are openly hostile to remote work and hybrid work, and it creates a lot of strain on employees who are worried about the city council hiring a city manager who would take away remote work or telework options. And so that's a huge part of this, that as leaders in human resources, as leaders in public and nonprofit organizations, you have to appreciate the role that public perception has on your work. Um, like I said, if you are a manager and cannot trust your employees to work from home, it means you're a bad manager, because you should be working with employees to create telework plans. What are the expectations? What are your technology contingency plans? The first job I took post pandemic, I was working fully from home, and I had to outline a plan for them that if power or internet were to go down at my house, what would I do? And it was something as simple as contacting my boss and saying, "Hey, my internet went down, and I will be back when it comes back on." And that was enough, but it forced me to engage with it. It forced me to have a conversation with my boss about what would happen in those situations, right? Um, Maintaining and creating community with an organization is really important. A lot of people thought that the move to remote work would kill any sort of community, and it does have a massive impact on the community building. But you have to find different ways to build community within organizations, whether it's the dreaded virtual happy hour, or get-togethers. At the work site, and what impact does how can you still look to build community within your workforce with remote work? Building mutual trust and shared responsibilities, understanding how performance is impacted by remote work. How can you create a situation in which one person's remote work does not affect another person's remote work, right? Maintaining transparent, responsive, and timely communication is the number one uh, piece of advice I would give to anyone ever, because communication through any sort of change, through any sort of uncertainty is oh, excuse me. Well, that's not fun. Where did it go? Right. One day I'll learn how to edit these videos. Um, uh, the communication, when we talk about change, when we talk about uncertainty, communication early and often is important. Even if that communication is, we're not sure, that is enough communication to help people feel more comfortable. But as soon as you stop communicating to people, as soon as you stop sharing information, that's when people will become hostile, will become apathetic, and that's when you have real concerns. And then also be thinking about technology, and then also think about privacy and security. If you're working in an organization that has significant privacy and security concerns, you have to understand the impact that that's going to have on your employees, the technology that they use and how they use it. Are they logging onto VPNs while they're at home? Are they using personal devices to conduct work? And what impact does that have? Um, like I said, if we could do an entire a whole nother semester, this is one of the topics that I would talk about first, because the impact of technology on the organization is really important. And next week for our closeout lecture, I'll be talking a lot more about these technological considerations that you need to have. But you're thinking about, what does your technology infrastructure look like? The impact of virtual meetings on employees. If employees are in virtual meetings nonstop throughout the day, is that actually an effective use of their time, and how can you control that? Are employees technologically or literate when it comes to their computers? Are they able to troubleshoot small technology problems? Are we giving them the training and support to accomplish that? And if not, is IT support available to assist, and can they assist completely virtually? And then also considering how you're using task managers, communication systems, and security programs, and what sort of policies you're putting in place and how you're enforcing those. For nonprofits, all of the benefits of remote work largely remain the same, but so do a lot of the consequences as well. It obviously is something that data has shown helps retain employees. It also important to understand that any sort of policy as it relates to telework should be reviewed by legal counsel. You should not be acting in major policies like this, otherwise you'll expose your organization to legal trouble. Do you have the money to invest in technology to support your employees? Are you asking your employees to bring their own technology? and what is the impact of that. Then also talking about isolation, especially already working in a smaller organization, what impact does that work from home then have on you? You also need to be thinking about expectations for following policies. What are the controls you put in place so that when you have a policy and people don't follow it, what are the consequences? How do you manage expectations? And how do you keep employees engaged in creating an atmosphere of trust? One of the roles that HR is increasingly having to play in organizations is as a mediator between managers and their direct reports, because um, a, a lack of trust can build very quickly without proper management and proper communication. So how can HR step in and give those managers the tools they need to properly manage their employees? Um, again, talking about the cost and ownership requirements of cell phones, computers, plans, insurance risks, what are the hazards, and then what are the public expectations around not finding a physical address. This is something that you'll have to think about from your organization's purpose perspective. Is your organization one that can actually function without a physical address or location? And then local governments, obviously. Are facing a significant challenge with remote work and telework, but it's important to remember that um, local governments are competing with in local economies for employees. And so we talk about these different sectors in isolation because they each have unique characteristics, but on the whole we're all competing in the same marketplace of talent. And so by changing policies, by not being agile and responsive to the rapid changing of the workforce at large, can have an impact on our ability to hire, which was already strained because of financial considerations. But I mean, when you start thinking about the sort of positions in local government that can actually work almost 100% remote, you're looking at finance, planning, IT. Reception can be done largely remote, right? Permitting, or assessing at the county level, procurement, youth and family supports, housing services, and social services. But all of those come with the dot dot dot. But only if we have the technology to support that telework. And in truth, the bigger transition for local governments is not the cultural transition, it's the technological transition. My city, when the pandemic first hit, was still largely a physical paper city. Records were physically printed and stored in filing cabinets, that we had not digitized a lot of our records, did not have a lot of digitized systems. And so the pandemic hit, and our organization had to rapidly adjust and address how are you going to move a system that was completely manual and completely acoustic to a completely online system. And you saw success rates vary. You saw our finance department struggled in a lot of ways because of the physical requirements of going and depositing checks, because we didn't have a way to or to digitally deposit checks that we received from sales tax, or maybe in paying of invoices, that sort of thing. And then you have the other side of the front. We had our courts office that essentially rotated coming in, and they spent the first however much of the pandemic while the courts were closed, rotating in safely to digitize records. And they digitized their records in, I want to say, a little over a month. All court records in the history of Commerce City were digitized that quickly, and that was something that they felt like they had to do, and our organization was able to support them in making that transition as well. Um, I did want to just share with this. This is a really, really good model for how you can talk about telework. For the city of Fort Collins has this um, toolkit that they use that allows you to understand what are the benefits of telework, what are the policies and procedures. This is good for both recruiting and retaining talent by giving them somewhere to go when they have questions, basic questions about benefits. And then you'll see right above me, right here, guidance for managers. Guidance for managers is really important. You have to be able to set those expectations appropriately. So enough of my soapbox. Um, Important to just understand that we are experiencing currently a seismic shift in what is considered acceptable in work. This flexible work, telework revolution that has been spurned by the pandemic is not going anywhere. And so we have to consider as HR professionals, how are we strategically using our tools to support employees in a telework environment, and how are we communicating with employees who cannot work remotely? How are we supporting them, and do we have the agility to support both types of employees? This is all something that we need to consider, and all something that is going to change. If I taught this course again in the fall, I would have different conclusions to draw because this is changing just so rapidly. But it's important to appreciate that telework is not going anywhere, and that we have major considerations to consider from a SHRM perspective. So I want to thank you all for taking some time with me today. Next week will be the final presentation, talking a lot about the other challenges that the workplace is presenting. Um, your first section of the Build a City came through. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone's comments. And then start exploring the rest of that Build a City. Like I said, this kind of takes the place of a question and answer type final, giving you something more fun. Look also very specifically at the requirements for the video. Please look at that and plan for that. Plan for the technology that you need to be able to support yourself. Don't put me in a position where I have to enforce that sort of rule. So I appreciate you all, and we will talk to you one more time next week.